Chapter 26. Someone's sleeping position is really ugly. James, if you really desire Emily so badly, then elope with her, venting your rage out on me for no reason. Are you even a man? You don't have the guts to defy your family. Also, you don't have the guts to confess to Emily that you married me merely because of her. You're merely a cowardly man, Lisa scolded him angrily before hearing the door click. It was entirely locked. James did not make a single sound the entire time. Lisa laid there waiting for a long time, but James did not react at all. She grabbed her arms as she laid down and could not help but wonder if she had gone too far out of line when conversing to James earlier. To be honest, it was understandable for him to be angry. Because of one error that she had done, it altered his early intentions for life. Of course, he was enraged. If it was not for her, his family may not have hounded him so, and may also not have used Emily to threaten him directly into a marriage. What happened with Lisa gave his family optimism, which was why the situation thus grew more pressing. However, Lisa was in an extremely bad circumstance too. She had merely planned to cook up a scandal, but instead, she had unexpectedly given up her first time. Thinking about it, she still felt glum. Lisa ultimately fell asleep after letting her mind run wild, having toiled throughout the day, alone in the room. James heard the din outside gradually go silent. However, he rested on his arms, unable to fall asleep. He only opened the door to the bedroom when he wanted to go to the bathroom. Lisa was curled up into a ball by the entryway, and she looked rather uncomfortable. James walked over and looked at her silently. After some time, he dropped his head and stretched his arms out to help her up. Lisa was undoubtedly exceedingly light as he carried her in his arms. He still felt as if she was weightless. Her sleeping face was scrunched up and had a touch of roundness, unlike her sharp chin while she was standing. When he stared at her now, she seemed more like a newborn sleeping peacefully. From time to time, she would stick out her tongue slightly to taste her cherry-red lips. He led her to the bed and stared at her sadly before shaking his head and went into the bathroom. When he came out, she was still in deep sleep. He raised the cover and burrowed under it, thinking to himself that both of them could put up with this arrangement since it was for just one night. Who knew that during the night, Lisa did not keep her limbs to herself while sleeping? Just when James finally felt tired following his fight with insomnia, a hand abruptly smacked his body. He tightened his teeth as he stared down at her tiny hand. He brushed her hand aside and flipped his body over, refusing to bother with her. Finally, after falling asleep once again, he again felt a leg rest itself over his thigh. Just that manner, he cycled between sleep and awakeness for some time. After, God knows how long, he gradually fell asleep due to tiredness after seemingly getting acclimated to her onslaught. When she woke up in the morning, Lisa realized with surprise that she was actually on the bed. However, she could not recall how she had arrived there. Could it be that James suddenly discovered his conscience last night and carried her onto the bed? But at this time, James was nowhere to be found in the room. Lisa immediately ran out, only to realize that the entire family was sitting and enjoying breakfast in the dining room. James ate his breakfast blankly, not granting Lisa even a glance. Sarah smiled and called out to Lisa, "Come and sit down." Lisa could only glare at James wickedly. This guy. Was he not purposely offending her? He did not wake her up even after he woke up, making her become the last one to arrive the dining room. Lisa sat down and said regretfully, "Sorry, I woke up late." All grins, Sarah said, "No worries. You must have been fatigued yesterday night. James didn't wake you up because he adores you." It would be a wonder if he genuinely did adore her. She gazed at James, who was only holding his spoon beautifully. He looked like a dignified Persian cat that was eating, his every movement so meticulous that it made him good-looking. However, he did not gaze at her at all. Sarah's words were ambiguous and made Lisa feel even more humiliated. She had been exhausted yesterday night since she had quarreled with James for virtually of the night. In the end, not only did she fail to win, but she was also severely spent both personally and physically. When Lisa recalled this, she could not help but stare at James. James caught her staring this time, turned to her, and rolled his eyes. Sarah. witnessed their interaction and immediately started smiling. It looked like the two of them interacted quite a lot. When she initially made the two of them married, she was still afraid that their relationship would deteriorate owing to James's too aloof personality, but suddenly it looked like they genuinely got along extremely well. This child, James, was unique from his two brothers. He did not like conversing and did not like dealing with others either. He was pretentious and overbearing. When she forced him interact with a girl, she frequently noticed no reaction from him at all. It was extremely astounding that he could interact with Lisa in such a manner. Sarah said, "Lisa, you're really too skinny. Eat more." As she expressed this, she quickly heaped food on Lisa's plate. Lisa cried furiously, "No need, there's no need. I can help myself, Mother." "No way. You're really too skinny." Sarah said, "Now that you're part of the family, we must make you plumper." Lisa said, "Does being slim not look good?" Sarah said, "Being slightly plumper looks good too." "Why? Who dislikes it? Does James dare to give you the cold shoulder for being plump?" James stared at Lisa. She was indeed a tad too skinny. When she placed her arms on the table, the breadth of skin was white and transparent, and her arms felt like they might break if someone tried to bend them. "There's nothing for me to dislike," he replied. Sarah said, "See, I told you James wouldn't dislike it." Lisa glanced at James. Of course he did not dislike it. They were in a false marriage nonetheless. It would be fantastic as long as his Emily did not get obese. So Lisa twisted her lip and said, "Mother, don't listen to him. Men are all the same. Although they declare that they'll appreciate you whether or not you're obese, they nonetheless like skinny ladies in their hearts." After hearing this, Sarah stopped before laughing out loud. There were waves of laughter at the dining table. As Sarah glanced at Lisa, she genuinely started like her more and more. Her words were amusing and her charm was friendly. She was not pretentious at all. After eating, Sarah even handed them a stack of food to take away before reluctantly leading them out of the house. Lisa went away from the house with James. In the car, Lisa tugged at James and said, "I didn't expect your mother to be such a nice person. Before this, you talked about her as if she was really difficult. You terrified me to death." As James peered at her face brimming with happiness, he gazed at her profoundly. He was pretty startled, too. It appeared like everything proceeded nicely when she came to his apartment. He could tell that everyone, whether it was his grandfather or his mother, all liked her very much. However, he still could not help but say, "As long as it's not Emily, my mother likes everyone else." As expected, Lisa tilted her head to peer at him. She pursed her lips and thought to herself that this man was clearly a jerk. Lisa suddenly remembered that she still had countless red packets still to be opened. She decided to pull them out and started opening them. When she opened them and took a look, she found that the thick red envelopes did not hold money. They had title deeds. Shocked, she clicked open the deeds and was then extremely astounded. Good Lord, is this a red packet? Chapter 27. I won't let you. Nathan simply stared at her sideways before turning back towards the front indifferently. A title deed and property deed. Is there a problem? Your family is really too generous, Lisa said. Nathan replied, As the Carter family's young madam, you deserve it. Lisa said, So these are all given to me? Nathan said, Of course they are. Lisa stared at the title and property deeds before raising her head. They are too valuable. How can I accept them? Nathan said, Just take them. They're designed to be delivered to the young madam of the Carter family. And you are, in fact, the young madam. Thus, you don't have to feel uncomfortable. Lisa thought that his words made good sense. While smiling, she gazed at the two red packets repeatedly. It looks like there are some benefits to tolerating your bad temper. Nathan glanced at her. You money grubber. Lisa was in a good mood. She turned her head and asked, Otherwise, what else is the point of marriage? It's either for love or for money. Obviously, marrying you out of love doesn't make sense. It's only money that would make sense. Nathan shook his head speechlessly. He looked at her smiling till her eyes became slits. Her cheeks also get slightly rounder. They were white but stained with a bit crimson, and she actually looked a little lovely. His stare fixed upon her for some time before he moved his head. However, right at this moment, he saw that his phone was ringing. It was a call from Emily. However, Nathan subconsciously glanced at Lisa beside him first. Seeing as she was still scrutinizing the title papers in depth, he picked up the phone. However, his voice was slightly quieter than usual. "What's up?" "Nathan, you promised to celebrate my birthday with me tonight. I called to confirm. Which restaurant we should go to? What do you want to eat?" "It's your birthday." "You decide," he said. "All right, then I'll make a reservation at the Western restaurant we often go to." "Okay. Nathan, are you feeling unwell? Why is your voice so soft?" Emily asked, perplexed. Once again, Nathan shot a sideways glimpse toward the guy beside him. When he saw that she had raised her eyes and looked over, he instantly felt a bit terrible. However, he said into the phone, "It's nothing. I'm in the car. We'll speak it again when I get home. Let me know after you make the reservation." "Oh, all right." Emily hung up the phone. Nathan placed his phone away and stared at Lisa. "What are you looking at?" Naturally, Lisa had heard that he was having a conversation with Emily. Pretending to seem calm, she shrugged her shoulders and muttered, "Nothing. Only the two of us are in the car. Who else can I look at besides you?" As she said this, she dropped her head again and resumed stroking the title deeds while looking like an immensely engrossed money grubber. Nathan drew in a deep breath before turning his head away. Lisa thought to herself, forget it. It was a false marriage from the outset anyhow. It's none of my business that he's dating someone else. The money in her hands was still the most reliable. Very shortly after, they arrived home. However, the car had just turned around a corner when another car unexpectedly plowed into it hard. Within a single minute, the car was dented on one side, and smoke rapidly started rising from the front. Several autos that had been stealthily following behind quickly surged over. When the car door was opened, everyone noticed Nathan and Lisa holding together firmly. When the accident occurred, Lisa did not know what was happening. It was only when she was laying on his tight and unyielding body that her head felt a little clearer. However, the inside of the car was in a complete wreck. Nathan's expression was mournful and as icy as ice. His eyes seemed to be unfocused before they gradually focused on Lisa's face. She instantly said, "How are you feeling? Nathan, are you all right?" The automobile had knocked on his side of the car, and it scared her to death. However, Nathan only stared at her white face. Suddenly, he pretended to recollect something and lifted her arm in one swift motion. On her thigh, there was an unmistakable slash, and it was impossible to discern what was blood and what was flesh. Nathan's face clouded immediately. "All of you, move aside. Madam is injured." Nathan's voice sounded unexpectedly a touch dull and harsh. Without waiting for the people outside to react, he had already pulled Lisa's arms towards him and dragged her out from underneath. In Mainz. The brief second when the accident had occurred earlier, it was Lisa who had tossed Prudence to the winds and slammed herself against him. If not for her, he would have been the one injured at this particular time. Lisa only felt a flash of sorrow on her body once he hoisted her up in his arms. Thereafter, the discomfort began to intensify. The people outside were stunned. When they observed Nathan carrying Lisa as he moved out swiftly, they instantly followed behind him noisily. At the hospital, Lisa had lost an extraordinary amount of blood, prompting her to feel weak and fragile. She stared at Nathan beside her and felt his hand gripping hers. She did not know why, but with the heat of his palm consoling her with its warmth, she appeared to sense that it was not all that painful anymore. However, as she looked down, she realized that his white shirt had been stained with blood. She could not help but laugh. She glanced at his chilly face and whispered, "Nathan, I'm not dying now, right?" Nathan's heart froze. He subconsciously scrunched up his face as, his chilly glare lingered on Lisa in a castigating manner, but he did not dare to be too angry. "What nonsense are you spouting? You're not going to die." "But I lost a lot of blood," she said. "The doctor is treating you. You lost a lot of blood only because a large artery in your leg was slashed." "Ah, a major artery. It sounds scary. Tell me." If I die, will you be able to release yourself soon and fly away with your Miss Emily? Nathan's face darkened. There were turbulent waves in his jet-black irises and his brow furrowed. Shut up. I won't let you die. When he heard the name Emily, he genuinely felt slightly impatient. The emotion of not wanting to acknowledge her quietly rose in his heart. If she had not called, he would not have been constantly distracted, and he would have observed the abnormalities. Outdoors, Lisa said. Really? But it really hurts. Nathan glanced at her little face all wrinkled up. She appeared as pale as a sheet of paper, and her delicate and frail lips were shriveled together. Her glance made his heart seize up. He raised his head. Didn't you hear that? Madam said that she's in pain. Get the doctor to treat her quickly. Ryan had been following him by his side. When he watched a look of serious gloominess shadowing Nathan's face, he hurriedly turned around to urge the other persons to accelerate their speed. Nathan's attention stayed on Lisa's face. When he watched her turning her head away, presumably to hide her pain, his eyes darkened. He used his enormous hand to turn her face towards him. As he held her gorgeous chin, his glare was black. Look at me. Don't overthink. Mackay, she sang, but she still could not take the discomfort. Nathan's gaze landed on her lips, which had dried and shriveled from the massive loss of blood. Her lips were slightly parted, her respiration was heavy, and her brows had converged. He grasped her chin and maneuvered his body to go closer to her, before directly covering her lips, which had been continually opening and shutting. Chapter 28. There's no answer to why I love you. Lisa felt as if blood had suddenly surged to her head, converting everything to sheer confusion. It was only when his slightly cool lips brushed against hers and left behind a lingering patch of dampness that she regained her senses. He had kissed her, and he was still kissing her. He daringly pulled. Her teeth wide and almost looted her of all her air without providing her any opportunity to consider it all. Their tongues slammed against one another, and his tongue wrapped around the tip of hers. With one forceful suck, all of her blood seemed to begin flowing backward, and a feeling of numbness immediately spread across her entire body. Lisa's eyes widened. As she looked at his wonderful face in such close proximity, a fragrance overwhelmed her. It was tinted with the fire of uncertainty, and it helped her to momentarily forget her misery. Her fingers clutched his muscular hand as the heat left in his palm seeped into her hand in threads. She did not experience an ounce of agony again till the doctor sewed her wound up, until James slowly released her lips. Her aroma was as lovely as he recalled. After he released her lips, the residues of need lingered between his teeth. It might have been the prior boost in adrenaline that had allowed Lisa, who had lost an abnormal amount of blood, to stay awake all this while. However, when the doctor stepped up and proclaimed that he was done treating her, she laid down and fainted instantaneously, like a broken thread that was released. When Lisa woke up, she noticed that there was an expanse of blue around her. There were several types of apparatus in use. She froze and fought to get up, only to pull her wound below, that left her feeling a piercing pain. However, she realized that someone was still holding her hand. It was only then that she saw James reclining by the bedside, sound sleeping. Her little movement forced him to open his eyes hastily. What happened? He glanced at her with mild anxiety. Is there anything wrong with you? He seemed a little weary. Lisa could not help but wonder if he had stayed here accompanying her for the entire night. Lisa instantly said, No. I merely pushed on my wound slightly. Upon hearing this, James raced to stand up and pulled the cover to assess her injuries. It was still firmly bound and presumably would not cause to any complications. He let out a breath of relief and scowled at her. He said, Be a little more careful. Don't move about for no reason. In the final night, she moaned from time to time, and her groaning made him feel anxious. He could merely hold her hand like this and stay with her throughout the night. It was only when daylight came that he succumbed to his tiredness by lying down and falling asleep. Ryan could not stand to watch him like way, and asked him to sleep in the adjacent hospital room. But each time he moved, Lisa would whimper a couple times. Thus, he lifted his hand and gestured for Ryan to exit. He stayed here looking after her the entire night, Fortunately, the doctor stated that although a major artery had ruptured, the bleeding had stopped and she was going to heal with timely treatment. However, a significant volume of blood flowed from the major artery, so even though the bleeding stopped, there was still an incredible amount of blood loss, which led her to feel pretty weak. The doctor also said that it was highly dangerous for the major artery there to hemorrhage. If not for the early treatment, she would have likely died within a short period of time. Lisa felt that she seemed to be in much better spirits as she gazed about the magnificent VIP ward. If not for the vast quantity of apparatus, it actually looked nothing like a ward. She recognized that she was probably all right now. At the same time that she heaved a sigh of relief, she quickly remembered. Oh no, what about my title deed and my property deed? James glanced at her, bewildered. I don't know. Lisa was shocked. No way! She had placed it aside someplace in her moment of concern. How could it be that no one preserved it for her? Lisa replied, How could this happen? It's such an important thing. James glanced at her attentively. Fine. If it was really that crucial, then why didn't you hug your title and property deeds closely and huddle into a corner? You even shoved them aside and jumped on me. Felt slightly sorry towards her. He did not expect her to actually react that way. Lisa blinked. I forgot what happened. Maybe I did it in a moment of impulse. James glanced at her. Don't do it again next time. It was too dangerous. Lisa said, Of course. After being taught a lesson this time, I know what to do next time. It's simply because this was my first time and I didn't have experience. So I didn't know where to hide. James shook his head. Lisa said, Oh, right. My property deed and title deed can be recreated? Of course. If your name was on them, then they're yours. That's great. Lisa looked to be relieved. James said, Okay, money grubber. Since this obstacle has been fixed, it's time for you to eat something. The doctor advised that she could eat when she woke up, so he had previously directed someone at home to make something for her in advance. Now that she was awake, he called for someone to bring it over. However, she still wanted to move, so James pressed her down. I'll feed you. Just stay still. Lisa gazed at him with wonder. James had already set down a small table. He picked up the spoon and carefully scooped out a spoonful of porridge. Moving it to his mouth, he inhaled on it before moving it to Lisa. Lisa watched his succession of moves. They were smooth from beginning to end, and it looked extremely good. She could not help but smile. She opened her mouth and ate it in one bite, but subconsciously bit on the spoon. James furrowed his brow. Looking at her lips, they were somewhat redder than they were yesterday, with a delicate moistness brought out by the rice porridge. His throat bobbed and his brow got a little more stern. Oh, sorry, she muttered faintly after swallowing the oatmeal in her mouth without detecting anything different about James. James commented, Can you eat a little more carefully? Although his tone was urgent, he nevertheless put out his fingers to wipe off the porridge spilling down from the corner of her lips. His fingers brushed her soft and sweet lips. A slight feeling of numbness appeared to radiate from his fingertips. Right at this point, his cell phone that he had placed at the side unexpectedly started ringing. In response, James set down the bowl and looked at his cell phone. It was a call. From Emily. James glanced at Lisa before picking up his phone and heading out to answer it. Lisa blanked out. Watching the door close, she thought to herself, There's no need to think to know who is calling. When James answered the call, he heard Emily's concerned voice. James, why didn't you come last night? You didn't answer any of my calls. Either. His phone had rung once during the night, but at the time, Lisa was still in a coma. Worried that it may disrupt her tranquility, James immediately urged Ryan to remove the phone out of the ward. Upon hearing the indignance in Emily's voice, James said, Something came up last night, so I couldn't go. I don't care what came up, James. If it happened on any other day, it would have been okay. However, yesterday was my birthday. How could you have me wait for you for so long alone? Emily started to cry again. James pondered for a moment. I'm afraid today won't work. Chapter 29, I Don't Want Scars. On your body, Emily's wrath was driven to its height when she hung up the phone immediately. As James listened to the disconnected tone via his phone, he took a moment to focus. When he saw that the doctor had arrived, he followed him into Lisa's ward. The doctor had already checked Lisa's injury. The cut on her thigh was recovering well, and she was going to be able to walk again very soon. James observed from the side. Within the time that he went out to attend a call, she had already fully cleaned out the food. Not only that, she had also initiated an argument with the doctor over how the room looked so great. She was quite heartless and ungrateful. James looked at the scar on her thigh and commented to the doctor, "Can the scar on her thigh be removed?" The doctor rushed to speak to James, respectfully and cautiously. "That depends on the individual's body constitution. Seeing as Madam doesn't normally have any scars, she doesn't seem to be the kind to have scars. It's possible that she may heal, but with a scar this deep, it's likely to leave a bit of a scar." While stitching up the wound, he had carefully adopted a style of stitching that would not leave a scar. But now, the wound still looked jagged. James did not want any scars to be left on her body. As he stared at her wound, he scowled harshly. "I hope there won't be a single scar on my wife's body. Get your best doctor to come up with a solution." When the doctor heard this, his face paled and he hurriedly nodded again. When Lisa saw the doctor go, she lifted her head to say to James, "It looks like it'll definitely leave a slight scar. But it's all right. If I'm filming, I can quickly cover it up with foundation." But James peered at her attentively and murmured, "No, if this hospital can't do it, I'll look for the best doctor on planet to deliver you the required therapy. I will absolutely not leave you with a single scar." As Lisa glanced at his grave visage, she felt a tiny warmth in her heart. She grinned at him and asked, "Why? Will you loathe me for the scars on my body?" Seriously, a wife who shares her husband's hardships must never be put away. Did you hear that? No matter how terrible I get, you cannot push me aside. James was astonished for a long time. He looked at Lisa and murmured, "Relax. I won't cast you aside. I definitely don't want to see scars on your body." He did not want to watch her get harmed, especially because of him. As he glanced at Lisa covered in a striped medical gown, he recalled her white, silky, and beautiful skin. He immediately felt concerned knowing that it could get damaged by such a large scar, all because of him. Lisa moved slightly as she spoke, staring at him. "Or is it because you feel guilty when you look at it?" James glared at her. "What nonsense are you saying?" However, he genuinely felt a little awful. Lisa replied, "If you really feel guilty, then treat me a little better from now on. It's fine enough providing you don't kick me out for no reason." James froze. He recalled the day when he left her at the entryway. His rage had been sparked mainly because of her unnecessarily filthy mouth. From the day he was born, there had never been a single woman like her who was arrogant enough to speak to him like this. But right now, when he stared profoundly at Lisa, he merely muttered softly, "Okay." Lisa raised her head in surprise. As she gazed at James, she slipped into a little stupor. What did he just say? James adjusted his attention, bowed his head, and appropriately arranged the drugs that the doctor had given. He then started to pour water for her to consume the pills. On the first day, Lisa's wound was still stinging slightly, but because the hospital had already done the greatest therapy on her, she did not feel too bad. That night, when it was about time, Lisa felt a little dazed and was going to go asleep. She glanced at James through her narrowed eyes and asked, "What are you going to do tonight?" James said, "You don't need to worry about me. I'll just sit here." Lisa asked, "Why don't you go back and sleep?" "No need. I'll sit here and watch over you." When James considered about leaving her here alone, he just felt that she would be too lonely. After all, she was not like other people who were surrounded by their family members. She only had him as her husband. Lisa said, "It's really not necessary. Maybe you can go outside and find a spot to sleep." James responded, "No, there are so many apparatus here at night, and you also need someone to watch over you. I'll just stay here." "Ah." Then, Lisa was a bit touched. She peered at James and then looked again at her own bed. The bed in the VIP ward was much bigger than the usual bed. She pondered for a minute and decisively patted her own bed. "Why don't you just come up and sleep here? The bed is spacious enough, too." James's gaze flashed surreptitiously as he glanced at the spot that she had patted. However, a little sensation of secret satisfaction flitted by in his heart. As a matter of fact, he did not feel repulsed at all. Seeing as he neither rejected her offer nor agreed to it, Lisa queried, "Again, why? Are you worried that I'll jump you? In such circumstances, I'll put the cushion in the middle. The bed is extremely spacious. It's completely possible for us to sleep separately." James's brow furrowed slightly. All right. Then we'll do just that. Let's relax early." When she realized that he had actually consented, Lisa hurriedly slipped to the side to provide him space. James tidied up for a while before climbing onto the bed. They slept on opposite sides, with a pillow between them. However, Lisa had overestimated herself. Although she laid there like this, she kept feeling that she could sense the breathing of the man beside her, despite the fact that he looked to have fallen asleep long ago and was lying perfectly still. Fortunately, the influence of the medicine helped her to finally fall into a deep sleep swiftly. James realized that the lady next him was no longer tossing and turning, and her respiration had gradually quieted down. He understood that she was probably already asleep. Heaving a sigh, he flipped to his other side and tried to fall asleep too. However, just when he was going to fall asleep, a leg suddenly descended roughly on his torso. James's eyes darkened. This Lisa? Was her thigh not hurting anymore? Her injuries did not alleviate her poor sleeping posture. To not touch her wound, he grasped her delicate thigh and carefully moved it away. But then, a soft arm rested on him again. James imagined that unless a knife was put between them, nothing else placed there would be able to obstruct this hyperactive woman. He tenderly held her arm, turned his head and softly placed it back. But suddenly he came face to face with her placid, drowsy face. Her scarlet lips were bright and moist. Right now, it appeared like this hardy woman was already significantly different from the woman who was about to die yesterday. She had rapidly regained her vitality. Then she arched forward. James halted. He realized that her lips were already touching his face. If he moved a bit, he would be able to touch her exquisite red lips. The moistness of her lips created a slight shiver through his body, and a spark of electricity seemed to rush through him. Staring at her mouth, he immediately felt his mouth get dry. However, she once again began to move randomly. Her small lips directly brushed against his lips. A surge of dry heat made James wrinkle his forehead deeply. "Lisa, you're playing with fire." In a threatening tone, he spat out a warning through pursed lips. "I dare you to attempt moving again." However, Lisa absolutely could not hear his scratchy voice at all. Chapter 30. I've gotten used to her poor sleeping posture. Ryan's heart thumped as he stared at her lips. They had a fantastic form and were moist and velvety like the wet and red flesh of fruit. However, they also seemed to have a tint of seduction. He turned his head and softly moved closer. However, just as he inched closer, her set of big eyes that had been serene abruptly opened. His arrogant visage froze then when he stared at Lisa's wet eyes. At that time, she felt that the distance before her eyes was a little dubious. In turn, she massaged her eyes in a blur. The influence of the medication had also stripped her of her rationale. As she looked at his beautiful and perky lips before her eyes, she felt her heart itch. "Sleep properly." He let out a dry cough and stretched his palm out to cover her eyes. Soon later, her breathing evened out again. On the other hand, Ryan turned his head aside and did not peek at the woman next him again. But as he closed his eyes once again, he could still feel her arm pounding his chest. He frowned, but he seemed to have gradually gotten used to her infrequent attacks. He soon went straight to sleep. On the second day, Ryan was already long gone when Lisa woke up. It was only when she was done washing up that Ryan brought breakfast over. Lisa's thigh no longer hurt, and appropriately, her mood also took a turn, for the better. She looked at Ryan and added, "Just like I told you, it's definitely possible to sleep like we did last night. Look at how much sharper you look." Ryan merely glanced at her silently. He did not speak about how he had discovered her draped across his body when he woke up in the morning, and how she had drooled on his neck. Just the thought of that made him feel an itch on his neck. Very shortly after, the doctor came to change Lisa's bandages again. Looking at her wound, it seemed to have grown much better. However, the scar was still unattractive, and Ryan continued sporting an uncomfortable grin. Doctor, when will my wife's thigh recover completely? The doctor heard Ryan's quiet voice when he questioned this and promptly said, "This will need—" Before he could react, Ryan's cell phone started ringing. Ryan took a look. It was Emily. Still waiting to hear the doctor's reaction, he declined the call. Sensing the predicament, the doctor proceeded, "This is—" But right at that moment, his cell phone started ringing again. Ryan peered at his cell phone a little impatiently. Emily's name continued flashing on the screen. At the side, Lisa lifted her head and said, "Ryan, pick up the call first and we'll discuss it later." Ryan's face clenched. He glanced at Lisa before grudgingly turning away and walked out while holding his phone. He took up the phone, his annoyance showing somewhat in his voice. "Emily, is something the matter?" Emily pouted playfully via the phone and asked, "Why did you reject my call earlier?" Ryan was still mulling over the doctor's words and whispered into the phone, "I was busy just now, why?" Emily said, "You didn't come to celebrate my birthday, and after that, you didn't care about me either." "Ryan, what precisely is up with you?" Ryan recalled the day of her birthday. Because of the automobile accident that happened that day, he did not meet her, and afterward he was occupied reacting to Lisa's injury. "I've just gotten busier recently." Because the accident had not been made publicly known, Ryan did not notify Emily either. "Now that I'm ill, won't you come and visit me too?" Emily whined. "You're ill?" Ryan asked. Emily gulped down a sob and said, "I want you to come and keep me company. I don't care what you're occupied with. Ryan, if you don't come to see me, I definitely won't get better. Right now, I feel like I'm about to die soon." Was it actually that severe? To the point that she was going to die? After Ryan returned to the ward, he explained to Lisa, "Something happened to Emily. I had to walk over and have a look." Lisa spaced out. She glanced at him and nodded her head. "Oh, go ahead. There are so many people watching over me here. Nothing will happen anyway." Ryan nodded and glanced at her seriously before stepping up to her. He put his hand out to wrap her into the cover and positioned her exposed leg properly. "I'll call someone to look after you. You move too much when you sleep. Make sure not to touch your wound," he said. Lisa said with wonder, "When did I move in my sleep?" What happened last night came to Ryan's mind. He snorted to her and said, "You say you didn't move when you nearly flew to heaven. In any case, be a little more careful. Don't be so restless. If it starts to bleed again, your leg will be good for nothing." "Okay, stop nagging. Quick, go look for Miss Emily. Doesn't she have any important matter?" After considering, Ryan agreed with what she had mentioned. He lowered his head and headed away. He reached Emily's house after driving for almost half an hour. Emily's room was like a princess's room. She lay swaddled in her blanket as she listened to the noises outside. When she barely heard the sound of a car, she quickly looked at her clothes. Ryan stepped in very soon after, only to see Emily laying on the bed with half of her body exposed. Although she said she was ill, there was apparently still makeup on her face as she slept in bed. Under the blankets, her silk nightwear covered her very slightly. She fired delicate glances at him, ones that were as silky as silk, making her look extraordinarily gorgeous. Ryan blanked out. He glanced at her while she lay there and gently hummed. She added, "Ryan, if you didn't come quickly, you wouldn't have been able to see me anymore." James walked over hurriedly. "How did you fall ill when you were completely fine?" With the knowledge that he was coming, Emily had especially gotten someone to straighten up the place. She sprayed on a fresh-smelling perfume and specially selected a lovely nightgown. Her freshly bathed body carried some compassion and loveliness with it. She looked at him kindly and responded unwillingly, "I don't know. I just know that on the day you didn't come, I cried the whole night. After that, I couldn't eat anything either. I phoned multiple doctors to come over, but none of them knew what was wrong. I thought I was dying." How was she about to die? Lisa was the one who almost died. James could not help but think of Lisa. As he stared at Emily, he was little annoyed. "Emily, I didn't go to your birthday party that day because something urgent came up. I really could not leave. Furthermore, it was a question of life and death. I had little time to spare on other affairs, including this particular instance of you unexpectedly phoning for me to come." I really shouldn't have come at all. It's simply because you mentioned you were ill. How was she actually ill? He felt that Emily was genuinely too inconsiderate this time. Emily took a glimpse. James was truly pretty angry. In the past, he could never even bear to say a single nasty word to her. She did not feel that this had anything to do with Lisa either. Her eyes flew around as she concluded that the subject he had to deal with must have been quite severe, which was why he was thus angry. She started out crying immediately. With tears flowing down her face, she hurriedly said to him, "James, I had no idea if something had happened to you. I was just too worried about you. I love you too much. That's why I was also really upset. You could have told me if something was up. However, you aren't even aware that I cried the entire night that day. I kept phoning your number, but none of my calls got through." He watched as Emily started crying regretfully. Her remarks were indeed poignant, and James's heart warmed. He lowered his voice and said to her, "All right, sorry, Emily. I spoke too aggressively because I was so anxious. It was I who didn't handle things properly that day and made you worry." Emily was still crying relentlessly. James could only pat her shoulder. "All right, Emily, I genuinely apologize." Upon hearing his earnest apology, Emily thought to herself, as expected, he still could not endure for her to cry. She bit her bottom lip and whispered wretchedly, "As long as you know."